Hey guys, how's it going? I'm on chess.com once again. As you can see, this is not a live board. I actually just got done playing this game and I had some commentary for it, but my opponent did some rather annoying time burning, and so I decided to throw out the footage and I would just sort of do a quick analysis. There's not really a whole lot to say. Like my last game, my goal was to simply not leave any pieces hanging, and I did reasonably well. There were a couple of hairy moments in the game that I want to talk about. So we'll just get right to it. One thing that I've been doing a lot of recently when I play the queen's pawn is to not immediately play e3 to back up. Sorry, yeah, that's right. To back up d4, and I do that for a couple of reasons. First of all, I want to be able to get my bishop outside of the pawn chain that I'm going to have, and so it's sometimes a good idea if your opponent doesn't call this pawn to question, and of course it's already backed up by the queen. There's really no rush to getting this pawn push in there, so that's something worth mentioning. And this pawn actually ends up being pretty important later on in the game. Anyway, my opponent follows up with e6. I decide that I'm going to fiend Ketto, not for any reason in particular. That's just a position that I'm used to. Standard development of the knights. Sorry about the screen rocking to and fro. And my opponent. So on this move, it would have been a really good idea not to immediately castle kingside, and I even said that actually while I was playing, but unfortunately, I did it anyway. And one of the reasons why this is a little worrying for white is that if black decides to castle queenside, which he absolutely can do, this is a totally healthy pawn structure over here. These pawns are going to start barreling down on my king's house, and that could be a little uncomfortable. And as it turns out, things get a little hairy on this side of the board. So that should have listened to myself. Black continues with development by deploying the knight to a comfy square. This pawn push here is just to make sure that the knight doesn't enter my position. This bishop and knight are sort of working harmoniously with one another. I don't have to worry about check anymore, so that's good, but just to make sure there isn't any funny business going on over there. Bishop deploys to d6. Yeah, I mean, I guess why not? Clears the way for castling, although my opponent never gets to. Bishop e3. Again, this move, really it's to... I wanted to reshuffle my pieces, actually. And my plan was to get my queen behind my bishop so that I could swing at this bishop. But black ends up sort of saving me the favor. And this is where things start to go a little bit haywire. Now, at this point, I was definitely trying to figure out how I was going to deal with these pawns that were moving over here. And if this pawn move hadn't been played, I was just going to queen here and then chuck the bishop onto this square. But because this pawn move is played, I do something a lot dumber. And this is where things start to get a little messy. So I play queen to d3. My thought here is that I wanted to get my queen activated. And I also wanted to get my bishop out of the way, because I had some thoughts of maybe sending the queen somewhere. I honestly don't even remember because this was such a cockamamie plan, but things start to go a little awry. So we get this pawn push, swinging at the knight, and there aren't really that many options for me. Knight here is not working, right? Because knight here, you're just losing material. You'd be down a pawn. So that doesn't work. Knight back probably is my best move here, but I settle on knight to d2, and when I was recording this, I even said to myself out loud. So I didn't say it to myself. I said it. I was like, "This is not a good idea because my queen is not very happy about being here." And sure enough, immediately things start to get a little bit messy. So this pawn push here, it didn't seem too bad initially because I thought I could just take, because I'd have this fork here, so the knight would have to recapture. But the knight, when it does that, swings at the queen with tempo. So things are a little nerve-wracking here. The queen can't go here, can't go here, can't go here. And it was pretty frightening. But I did have queen d4. And I'm sure that against a better player, this queen would have been dead meat. I'm sure of that. There was probably something that could have been done to really trap it. But we get c5. I land a check, and at this point I was breathing a sigh of relief because I figured I'd be able to get my queen out of harm's way. And then the queen hops onto this diagonal, and she actually stays here for most of the rest of the game. And my goodness, does she get work done on that diagonal. It's great stuff. My opponent plays b6. This is probably a bad move, simply because there's probably something stronger that should be done. I don't even know what the point of that was, to be completely honest. It backs up this pawn, I guess. I don't know. Knight takes pawn. This pawn was undefended, right, because the queen's now on this diagonal, so I'm up a piece. Knight takes knight, and that's just going to serve to make my lead even more obvious. One thing that's important to note, this knight does not move for the rest of the game. And also, again, this pawn, man, E2, man, this pawn is doing work. It's offsetting this knight, so he can't go anywhere. He'd only be able to move backwards. Right now, he doesn't really have anywhere to go. Anyway, black swings at my queen, and I was really happy to see this for a couple of reasons. First of all, I didn't want her to be so exposed, because that requires more calculating. But also, getting rid of my white bishop is totally fine with me, because now my king's flight square is really nice. So I don't have to worry about a bishop sitting on this diagonal, or a battery involving the queen being there as well. Rook here, very natural. Put it on an open file. I've claimed it. I'm opposite black's queen. That's going to end up being a problem for black very soon. Again, these pawns on the king side of the board are marching, and that's making me a little uncomfortable. But it turns out that black makes a pretty serious mistake coming up here, and it's right here. So this pawn push is threatening quite a bit. But one thing that you probably don't want to do as black is take, because that just activates my rook completely. And I was really hoping, after playing just knight here, again, just swinging at this piece because it is pinned, I was really hoping that my opponent would take, but I was expecting pawn push. And if that had been played, I don't think it would have been catastrophic or anything, but it would have definitely made things a little uncomfortable for my king. But inexplicably, black takes, and again, this is just a huge misstep. Not only are the pawns on the king's side of the board completely neutralized and not frightening in the slightest anymore, but this also activates my rook. And this rook ends up being incredibly, incredibly powerful. Pawn push, at this point, the game is just sort of falling apart. Since that pawn's undefended. My opponent burned about 6 minutes here. I thought he was going to disconnect entirely, but he comes back and plays king here. One thing that's worth mentioning is that this king only has 2 squares to go to because of this queen, who's doing a fantastic job, and this knight, who's doing a fantastic job, and you really do not want to play king here. That would be really bad because you have double check, and this knight would be won. So anyway, king up. I settle on knight to e4. The thought with this is mostly just to continue to add pressure here. There was probably something a little bit more direct. I was thinking of a couple of moves at this point. Bishop here was coming to mind, and it turns out my opponent doesn't do anything to get out of that pin, and so we do end up seeing that because we just get rook on the f-file, challenging my rook, but I choose to completely ignore that. Bishop checks the king. This is winning the queen, obviously. And then at this point, rook on a takes d8, and I simply play rook takes bishop, winning material and also threatening to completely liquidate the position. And that's how the game ended. So I was really happy with this game, except for in the beginning when I completely trapped my queen right here. This was a really silly move, and I think if I was playing against anybody rated even slightly higher than this, I would have paid a hefty price for that mistake, but I end up sneaking out of it, and that's what amateur chess games look like. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Slightly different format than some of my other ones, but I was happy with it. The time controls were 12 minutes each, and yeah, thanks again for watching.